Here on behalf of the Board of Trustees and the members of the Council to welcome you to this evening's meeting. And guests of members of the Council, on behalf of both the members and the Board, it's a pleasure to welcome you as well. Tonight's meeting is being co-sponsored by the World Trade Center Institute. I would also like to thank ITC Enterprises Incorporated for sponsoring this evening's reception. Additionally, I would like to thank both Mr. Peter Osterchrist, one of our trustees and president of ITC, for serving as a trustee host, and Mr. Charles Cole, the president of First National Bank, for doing likewise. Our next three programs will be May 16th. The Honorable Harry Hughes, Governor of the State of Maryland, will address the Council on the subject of Maryland's international economic relations and policy. And on the 23rd, Morris Drake, Special Presidential Emissary to the Middle East 1982 to 83, will address the Council on U.S. Middle Eastern policy. And on the 6th of June, Mr. Charles Gillespie, who served as our ambassador to Grenada in 1983 and presently is the principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for the Caribbean and Central America, will speak, of course, on the subject of U.S. policy in the Caribbean and Central America. Our topic this evening, as you know, deals with Japan's role in the global economy, subtitled Trade, Investment, and Money. We're all interested in Japan, her role in the world, and in the international economy. I don't need to repeat the variety of specific issues that capture the attention of all those who are interested in international economics. We're interested in Japan's role in the global economy in general and her reaction to a whole series of particular questions. And we're interested in the openness of her economy to other countries of the world. Our guest this evening is eminently qualified to deal with this general topic. He has extensive experience in the Bank of Japan. He's been in their economic research department, their banking and foreign departments. He served as deputy director of the latter two. He served as alternative executive director to the IMF, and most recently and presently holds the position of representative of the Bank of Japan in the United States. He was educated at the University of Tokyo and was a graduate student at Stanford University in the Department of Economics. So he's been to the United States before. We think of, I noticed in the paper the other day that Fulbright scholars from Japan are touring the country in what I think is a marvelous display of the kind of cooperation and friendship that we like to think exists between two great nations who depend upon one another as partners, but also, of course, are stiff competitors in many aspects of the international economy. It gives me a great deal of pleasure to welcome our guest, Mr. Mikio Wakatsuki.
Well, thank you, Mr. Brad. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to be invited to this distinguished gathering to present some of my views on the role of Japan in the international economy. Before that, I must say that I'm pleasantly surprised to see the entire change that the city of Baltimore has done. You know, I was here about 7 years ago, and I can hardly see the site which I remember about 7 years ago. Although the title encompasses such areas as trade and investment, my major topic today will be on financial matters because of my background and my responsibility. Mr. Brad just mentioned that I was a Fulbright student about 25 years ago. And at that time, the I was put into a so-called orientation course for the foreign student in the University of Colorado first. And of course, we call it Occidentation course. Today I'm happy to offer you a genuine orientation on Japan. I recall when Mr. Reagan, Secretary of Treasury of the United States, visited Tokyo last March. He preached that Japan has become the #2 economic power in the free world next to the United States. So Japan should act like #2. Well, some people in Japan took the message to mean that Japan should try even harder because she is only #2. Well, I'm afraid that maybe some people are doing too hard. Of course, the message which Mr. Reagan intended to deliver was that Japan should act responsibly as a #2 economic power by making our economy more free, international, and more open. But in fact, even without Mr. Reagan's admonition, Japan's economy, and not only the economy, but society as a whole, is changing very rapidly. The change is so rapid that some sectors of the economy cannot keep up with it. Agriculture is a typical example, and maybe to a certain extent, banking falls to this category. But the direction of the change is quite clear, and the move is gathering momentum. It is not only external pressures which urge more liberalization and internationalization, but also domestic pressures which generate more changes. On top of it, Mr. Nakasone, the Prime Minister of Japan himself, is a major driving force for the change. The Japanese newspaper reports that the increasing role of the Nakasone pressure, along with external and internal pressure, in the recent promotion of further deregulation and internationalization of the Japanese economy. Only a week ago, the Japanese government announced a 6-point package of external economic measures, which include deregulation of financial and capital markets, internationalization of the yen, further opening of the domestic market with a particular emphasis on the high technology area, and promotion of two-way flows of direct investment. So at least we are trying harder, maybe even though you may wonder whether it is hard enough or fast enough. With this general preamble, let me now turn to more specific topics of today, namely first, internationalization of the yen and deregulation of the Tokyo financial market. Number 2, exchange rate problem. And number 3, trade and investment issue. First, about internationalization of the yen and deregulation of the Tokyo capital market. When President Reagan visited Tokyo last November, Mr. Reagan and Prime Minister Nakasone issued a joint communique in which a paragraph stated that Japan would further liberalize the capital markets, internationalize the yen, and allow the yen to more fully reflect its underlying strength. As you may know, the U.S. Treasury and the Ministry of Finance of Japan are negotiating the follow-up measure to those effects. Internationalization of the yen is a somewhat strange word, and some people back in Japan misunderstand that it means to put the yen under international custody, just like West Berlin during the occupation days. But of course, what it means is to make the yen more usable and more used internationally in trade, in investment, and of course in holding external reserves. The U.S. allegation on this score is that the exchange rate of the yen does not fully reflect its underlying strength because the Tokyo market is not fully liberalized and the yen is not internationalized. Liberalization and internationalization will increase international demand for the yen and reduce the Japanese demand for dollars, which in turn eventually will lead to appreciation of the yen. While I do not disagree with this allegation, we think a little more direct and immediate cause of the dollar's overvaluation lies somewhere different. But I will come back to this a little later. As I mentioned at the beginning, there exists growing domestic pressures in Japan to deregulate and develop its financial markets. As the Japanese economy has become more matured, the perennial shortage of capital has gradually disappeared, and business and consumers have become more interest rate sensitive, just like in the United States. And elimination of foreign exchange controls and liberalization of capital transactions have made access to overseas financial market free and easy. And Japanese banks now have to face foreign competition in extending credit to Japanese firms. Massive issues of government bonds to finance huge budget deficits, of course in Japan, not in the United States, in the past years have now created a free secondary market and a unregulated higher yields in the market have become a serious threat to regulated bank deposits. The government has to diversify types and terms of new issues to facilitate the refunding. Various financial innovations promoted by security companies and assisted by technological progress in electronics are accelerating the changes and are paving the way to more deregulation. Therefore, the question is not whether to deregulate financial markets or not, but how to do it. In other words, deregulation is an inevitable issue we have to face sooner or later. And the question is how we should proceed without causing undue disruptions and adverse side effects. From the standpoint of the central bank, it is necessary to deregulate interest rates in order to maintain the effectiveness of monetary policy. Since the end of World War II, credit rationing and some sort of administrative guidance have played an important role in our monetary policy. But the recent change have reduced the importance of those direct measures. Business firms are no longer capital hungry, and they can resort to overseas market if funds are not available at home. So the central bank has to switch its reliance on credit rationing to the functioning of interest rate mechanism. That is to say, to exert influence upon economic activities through interest rate changes and control of the money supply. In this new environment, it is necessary to have a system which ensures the proper functioning of the interest rate mechanism. This is the reason why the Bank of Japan, or my institution, has been one of the active supporters of interest rate deregulation. Based on this line of thinking, what is envisaged now, a gradual deregulation of interest rates on bank deposits, development of open money markets, including creation of a banker's acceptance market in yen, which is easily and equally accessible by non-residents, and expansion of arrays of financial instruments whose interests are market determined. So these measures will be promoted together with efforts to make the yen more usable internationally, namely to promote internationalization of the yen. It is true that as of today, the yen still remains sort of minor or junior international currency, if not a local currency, as compared with the dollar, not necessarily by design, but because of market forces. Latest available data show that for use as a trading currency, the yen's role is very small. About 35% of Japan's total exports are yen denominated, and a mere 3% of Japan's imports are yen denominated. It is reported that Mr. Reagan was astonished by the small proportion of the yen denominated trade. But this is a reflection of commercial practices, bargaining position of the parties concerned, and various factors of historical origin. For example, a major portion of the Japanese imports is international commodities, which are priced in dollars and traded in dollars. American farmers are reluctant to accept the yen for their agricultural exports as they involve exchange risks. Availability of import financing in dollars, not in yen, was also a major reason of the dollar's dominance in earlier days. For reserve currency, the yen accounts for roughly 4% of the world official reserves, as compared with 70% of dollars and 12% in Richmond. As an investment currency, the yen is now more actively used. In 1983, the flotation of yen-denominated foreign bonds in the Tokyo market amounted to $3.8 billion. Long-term yen loans to overseas borrowers by Japanese banks reached $4.7 billion. Total outflow of Japanese long-term capital on the balance of payments basis registered some $32.5 billion in 1983, which exceeded that of West Germany. Hitherto, our basic stance towards the issue of internationalization of the yen has been that we should leave it to natural evolution, and that we should neither encourage nor discourage artificially by official measures. As to the reserve currency status, it is true that we have had a certain reluctance to make the yen an unlimited reserve currency, since it brings an additional burden to the pursuit of domestic monetary policy. The same reluctance has been shared by German, Swiss, and Dutch authorities. You may recall that the United Kingdom had declared that sterling pound should no longer be a reserve currency about 5 years ago. Although we continue to believe that internationalization should be left to naturally evolving forces, we are now moving toward a more positive stance than before. We are now trying to accommodate wider use of the yen in international trade by facilitating credit availability in yen. The creation of bankers' acceptance market in yen is intended to that effect. Further deregulation of the Tokyo financial market will make the acquisition of yen-denominated assets easier, and thus encourage larger holdings of reserves in yen by foreign monetary authorities as well as by private sectors. Further liberalization and great access to the Tokyo capital market will increase the brisk two-way capital flow to and from abroad. Therefore, I may say that Japan has crossed the river of no return, and further internationalization is just a matter of course. This also means more business opportunities to not only Japanese financial institutions, but also foreign financial institutions. But of course, needless to say, it also means more competition. A concrete program for more deregulation and internationalization is now under preparation, partly pending to the negotiation with the United States. The governing principles in this program will be that we will promote this program positively and voluntarily and gradually. A senior official of the Japanese government expressed an intention that the deregulation and internationalization should proceed on a step-by-step basis, though at a giant step. But I personally think that a step-by-step approach would end up in a gallop once it started, and in view of, or in the light of the experience in the United States financial deregulation. In this connection, I'd like to briefly touch upon the problem of the euro-yen, which is one of the contentions in the current U.S.-Japan financial negotiations. The euro-yen is rather a strange and unfamiliar word, and some of you may wonder what it means. Just like the euro-dollar is the dollar held outside of the United States, it is the yen held outside of Japan and traded outside of Japan. In other words, it is a non-resident yen which is not subject to controls of the Japanese monetary authorities. At the present, United States authorities are requesting that Japan should liberalize regulations on the euro-yen. We think that as the yen becomes more international and traded internationally, it is inevitable and in a way natural that the non-resident yen will grow. But because of its nature, the euro-yen falls outside the control of the central bank and tend to weaken the effectiveness of monetary policy. Therefore, we do not think it appropriate to encourage the expansion of the euro-yen market as our own policy. Therefore, we do not think unless the domestic markets are comfortably deregulated, there will be an undesirable shift of financial transactions from the domestic market to overseas euro-yen markets. Therefore, our priority of order is clear. The deregulation of the domestic market should come first, and then comes the problem of the euro-yen, which should be consistent with the deregulated domestic market. Nevertheless, as a first step, we have already introduced measures to facilitate euro-yen bond issues by residents and non-residents, and are about to liberalize some of the restraints on euro-yen transactions, which would not cause serious disruptions in the domestic market. As I explained a while ago, the United States request that Japan should liberalize its financial markets and internationalize the yen is motivated by the belief that the yen is undervalued because of the lack of liberalization and internationalization. But in our own view, it is not appropriate to take up this problem from the standpoint of the exchange rate problem, which is essentially of a short-term nature. We will pursue this problem as a long-run issue and for its own good. We realize that, after all, liberalization and internationalization will render benefit to Japan itself, as well as to the world. Only we want to proceed without causing major disruptions in our financial system. This now leads to my second topic today, namely exchange rate of the yen, especially the value of the yen vis-à-vis the dollar. It seems to me that there is a general perception that the dollar is considerably overvalued and the yen is grossly undervalued. In some quarters, there is a deep-rooted suspicion that the value of the yen is manipulated in order to maintain unfair advantage in trade. To this unfounded suspicion, I'm glad to point out that various official reports, such as those of Council of Economic Advisors General Accounting Office and Federal Reserve Board have indicated it by clearly stating that there is no evidence for the yen's manipulation. On the contrary, the monetary authorities of Japan want to have a stable and stronger yen. Governor of the Bank of Japan repeatedly stated that a stronger yen would be beneficial to Japan, and that belief is now widely shared by many Japanese industrialists. After all, in a country like Japan, which is heavily dependent upon imported raw materials, a stronger value of currency means cheaper imports, price stability, and increased international competitiveness. To the central bank, a stronger currency means more freedom of monetary policy. Some people argue that as long as the exchange rate is determined by market forces, that is, on the appropriate level, reflecting the point of equilibrium between the demand and supply in the exchange market. Others argue that the exchange rate should reflect economic fundamentals, such as performance in relative prices and balance of payments. From the latter point, the dollar is overvalued while the yen is undervalued. However, as you may know, the exchange rate is determined not only by economic fundamentals, but also by interest rate differentials and by geopolitical factors. While Japan is producing large trade and current account surpluses, a capital account is registering huge net outflow of capital due to wide interest rate differentials, particularly between the United States and Japan. Currently, U.S. long-term interest rates are around 13%, whereas those in Japan are around 7.3%. So we are inclined to think that the problem is not so much as a weak yen as a too strong dollar backed by unusually high rates of interest, and of course by very impressive good performance of price stability and brisk economic activities of the United States. Some people say, no, it is Japan's artificially low level of interest rates which is causing the problem. But in view of the price stability in Japan, where wholesale price index are even below the level of a year ago, and practically no inflation at all, and together with a high savings rate in Japan, it is difficult to say that Japan's rates are artificially low. In fact, Japanese industries complain that our real interest rates are too high. We tend to think that once the unusually high interest rates in the United States will be corrected, the dollar's overvaluation will be ameliorated, and Japan's underlying strength will be better reflected in the exchange rate of the yen. Let me add that we do not want a weak dollar. We want a strong and sound dollar. As we all know, that a strong and sound dollar is a kingpin of the international monetary system. Therefore, what we would like to have is a combination of a strong dollar and a stronger yen. While we try to maintain the underlying strength of the yen, it is our earnest hope that causes which make the U.S. interest rates unusually high would be eliminated soon. In fact, our wish to have a stronger yen is partly achieved, as the yen appreciated considerably vis-à-vis major European currencies, namely 18% against the Deutschmark, 20% against the pound sterling, 25% against the French franc, and 16% against the Swiss franc since the beginning of 1983. Appreciation vis-à-vis the dollar still remains quite modest, only 3.5% since the beginning of 1983. I now turn to the third topic of trade and investment. Japan's basic objective in the area of trade is the promotion and maintenance of a free trade system, which was repeatedly confirmed at the previous economic summit meetings. In the pursuit of this objective, the Japanese government has made strenuous efforts to advance further trade liberalization during the past few years in the face of growing worldwide protectionist tendencies. It has adopted several packages of market opening measures to reduce or eliminate tariffs and to simplify or ease import procedures, including various standards and certification systems. The government also announced a week ago to advance the implementation of the tariff reductions agreed upon at the Tokyo Round multilateral trade negotiations. In addition, tariffs on 71 items are going to be unilaterally reduced in fiscal 1985. Furthermore, it also intends to encourage the initiation of a new round of multilateral trade negotiations with a view to rolling back protectionist tendencies. Needless to say, behind this active movement, there is a strong Nakasone pressure. In spite of various efforts to accelerate imports, Japan's trade balance continues to show large surpluses. In 1983, trade surpluses amounted to $31.6 billion, and this year, even a larger surplus is estimated. One factor contributing to the large surplus is a dominant share of oil and oil products in our imports, which account for more than 40% of our total imports. Reduction of oil prices in 1983 alone contributed to the increase of surplus by $5 billion in 1983. Continued conservation efforts also reduced the oil import bill. I sometimes jokingly say that Japan is a primary quantity importing country, or a reverse of a banana country, because the fluctuation of the price of single commodity would affect our balance of payments drastically. Another major factor behind the large trade surplus is the difference in cyclical phase. While the economic recovery started early and strongly in the United States, Japan's recovery has so far been rather weak and lagged. Recently, however, there are some encouraging signs that Japan's recovery is picking up and more domestically generated, which we expect will help to reduce the large surplus. In the meantime, we continue to take a realistic stance in our exports. In the face of mounting protectionist pressures, Japanese exporters have acceded to an increasing number of requests for voluntary export restraints. As you may be well aware of, exports of automobile and steel are typical examples. It is estimated that approximately 40% of our exports to the United States and to the European communities are subject to some form of restraints, whether voluntary or involuntary. Roughly 20% of our total exports are subject to such restraints. We regard these restraint arrangements as the necessary means of supporting the free trade system when industries in trading partner countries suffer structural problems. But at the same time, we wish that such arrangements be coupled with adjustment measures in importing countries. Otherwise, they will become a permanent feature. Frequent questions which I encounter in the United States regarding trade is, what about agriculture protection in Japan? Or what about restrictions on beef and citrus? So in order to forestall tough criticism, let me have a few words about our agriculture. Agriculture is the most protected and inefficient sector in Japan. Yet, politically, it is the strongest, as farmers are the lifeblood of the incumbent conservative Liberal Democratic Party. Since this is the area where economic logics do not work, it is very difficult to counter-argue the criticism from abroad. A short and easy answer is nobody is perfect. Or in almost all developed countries, agriculture and agricultural products are protected. Even the United States maintains quotas on beef imports. But if I try to advocate what I criticize while I'm in my own country, food and other agricultural products are regarded as something that matters as much as national security. It is often strongly argued that a country should have a minimum supply of foodstuff for the assurance of survival. To older generations who experienced hunger soon after World War II, this argument has a considerable appeal. Also, the memory of turmoil in Japan is still fresh when the United States unilaterally announced embargo of soybean exports in 1975, upon which our protein supply is so much dependent. So I have to admit that there is some emotional element in import restrictions on agricultural products. Also, in all fairness, I may add that Japan is already the largest and most reliable market for the United States farm products. Japanese agricultural imports from the United States total $6.2 billion, or 17% of all U.S. agricultural exports. They are much larger than the combined sales of American farm products to the Soviet Union, Eastern European countries, West Germany, and the United Kingdom, which amounted to $4.3 billion. Japan's imports of American agricultural products virtually doubled between 1977 and 81. Imports provide 30% of Japan's consumption of beef. Regarding the direct investment, we believe healthy two-way flows are essential, not only to Japan but also to the world economy. At present, it is practically free to invest in Japan, and the residual restrictions which limit foreign investment in certain industries are going to be removed. One noticeable feature of overseas direct investments by Japanese firms during the past few years is a growing share of investments in developed countries. Last year, such a share reached almost 50% of our total direct investments. As you may notice, investment in the United States by the Japanese firms are on the rise. One reason for this change is that those investments are mostly in the area of manufacturing industries where relatively advanced technology is required and low wages are not a decisive factor. Rather, availability of skilled labor and proximity to the market are more important elements in deciding investments. Another reason is that those investments are envisaged with the aim of averting import restrictions and other protectionist measures. Some people call it forced investment, and there may be an element of it. But on the other hand, it may be a natural evolution for a manufacturing firm to shift from exports to direct investment as its business grows in the importing countries. Several successful cases, such as Sony, Sharp, and Honda in the United States, seem to have encouraged their competitors to follow the suit. As the Japanese firm gain confidence in labor relations and quality control of their products in the United States, I would expect the rising tide of direct investments to continue. Well, perhaps I should stop here and leave it to the floor for questions. Originally, I wanted to speak on a more global perspective, but I realized that my remarks have mostly centered around the U.S.-Japan relations. But this is hardly surprising. Today, economic ties between the United States and Japan, and of course including the so-called New Japan, such as Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore, are growing fastest in the world economy. We feel that the Pacific Ocean is diminishing rapidly. I sincerely hope that we will be able to keep the ties growing and to make them even more mutually beneficial. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for what was a very thorough and extremely informative presentation. Ms. Wakatsuki, of course, has agreed to entertain questions until 10 minutes after 7, our normal ending time. If it's absolutely essential for someone to leave early, we recommend that they leave before the questions begin. And of course, for future reference, if one has to leave early, it's good if one is seated on the far left of the room. Do you have a first question? Mr. Polk.
I will pick up from your concluding statement, and my question is really to enable you to touch upon that aspect of today's address, which you say you did not address, which is the global aspect of it. You see, I'm sure you realize, as everyone realizes, that the world does consist of other countries besides Japan and the USA, and also besides the extension that you mentioned, Korea, Taiwan, and Singapore. You also accepted that Secretary Reagan's statement that Japan and USA are 1 and 2, and in that sense probably I don't know, like 50%, 70% or whatever it is of the economic strength of the world. How do these two countries, in their repeated context with each other, political, economic and otherwise, view first, do they have a responsibility towards the developing and the underdeveloped world? If they don't think there is such a responsibility, do they think in the ultimate run, say 100 years from now, they can survive at the present level of prosperity without looking at the aspects of deprivation which exists in the rest of the world?
In 30 seconds.
That's a very difficult question. I would say that, of course, Japan cannot prosper without the cooperation of the rest of the world, including, of course, not only the United States, but all other countries, particularly those countries of Asia. That is the reason why we regard the aid to developing countries in the form of multilateral as well as bilateral is so essential. And despite the constraints in our budget system, budgetary situation, we continue to maintain the increase in our official assistance. And of course, the donation to the World Bank as well as IDA and other multilateral institutions. And of course, in formulating a trade policy, we continue to maintain the open and preferential type treatments to the developing countries, unlike some of the countries which repealed it. And I think it's the consensus to us among the Japanese officials as well as the private sectors that without the sound economic growth of the third world, we cannot, of course, stand. That's quite clear.
Yes.
In terms of our current President Reagan's visit to China, how does Japan view the development of American investment in China in light of the fact that you and the Chinese have developed a very strong trade relationship?
Well, I would say that we would welcome the improvement of the ties between China and the United States, because after all, the peace in those areas, which is so vital to us, is really a tremendous contribution, and not only to Japan, but to the growth of that area. And one other factor is that it gives a sort of assurance and insurance as well that our investments in the United States would go hand in hand with the United States. That, I'm sure, that gives certain assurance. Of course, it also means maybe competition, but I think it's quite healthy phenomenon, and it's quite healthy sign that this big powers, especially politically strong powers, if their relations are getting better and better, that the rest of the world would be benefited.
Yes.
With respect to your comments about exchange rate of the yen, I wish to express my concerns about whether or not it's feasible to expect the Japanese yen to increase in value, despite the fact that we do have, in fact, pointed out earlier, lower interest rates, as the external interest rates of the country do have a large effect upon the rate of exchange of that currency.
Well, as I explained, that there are two factors now in balance, almost in balance. One is that what is called the fundamentals versus interest rate differentials. And at this moment, well, I think it's during the past week, the dollar increased its strength, mainly because of the firming up of the U.S. interest rates. And so this shows that still the exchange market regards the interest rate much more important factor. And this is beyond the control of one country. It's very difficult to persuade the Secretary Reagan that the U.S. budget deficit has something to do with the U.S. interest rate. He says that there's nothing to do whatsoever, that the U.S. budget deficit has nothing to do with the high U.S. interest rates.
Would you say that the relatively low percentage of the Japanese GNP due to its defense budget has a lot to do with the success of the Japanese economy and its trade trade success?
I think it's yes, no doubt about it. I think it's not chosen by design, and I'd say that it's sheer result out of the most frequent situation soon after World War II. But that certainly helped our economy grow more rapidly by investing money into a more productive sector. That's no doubt about it.
I wonder if you could be more specific about that, sir. You made a point of interest rates. This gentleman raises the question of the defense budgets. There's a strong body of opinion in this country which says the interest rates, the high interest rates, come from the high defense budgets. Would you go so far as to say that in Japan, the low interest rates come from the low defense budgets? And perhaps to paraphrase what you said earlier, would you advocate a strong American defense and and a stronger Japanese defense.
I certainly disagree on this point. We are also trying to increase our defense expenditures within the limitation of our budget and, of course, political situation, including our constitution. Our constitution, prohibits the armament, and it's a national consensus. It's very difficult to change the pacifist sentiment of people, and I don't think it would be beneficial if we try to build up a large military forces in Japan. I don't think the neighboring countries would be happy about it, and I don't think the United States would like to see Japan grow quite a big military power. I don't know. There might be some differing opinions, but I myself think that way. So instead of spending more on defense, I think we should spend more effectively, say, on the aid to developing countries.
In view of the wide discrepancy between Japanese interest rate and American interest rate, to which you would attribute a considerable flow of money from Japan to the United States, from the Japanese point of view, what stands in the way of American industry, which needs money, borrowing it at 7% instead of 13%, but borrowing it from Japan?
Right. Well, our capital market is wide open. Only the problem is how the American industry regard the exchange risks. If people think that yen is going to appreciate quite rapidly, maybe for some, say, 2 or 3 years, then they think the low interest rate would not be so advantageous. So it's all up to the United States borrowers. And of course, at this moment, what the Japanese investors are doing is purchasing mostly the U.S. The portfolios, no direct investment, but some people are buying, of course, American stocks.
Yes, sir.
For a Japanese manufacturer, what is considered an adequate rate of return on its invested capital?
Well, I'm not sure as to whether I know the exact numbers, because the decision to make investments here in the United States depends not only the return, but also various other factors, such as maintaining the market share in this country and to avert the protectionist measures. So, for instance, when I talked with Nissan USA management the other day, they say that at this moment, price advantage is not a major consideration. They think at this moment the product quality is the most is the highest consideration. The priority they put. So apparently, it's cheaper to produce in Japan at this moment. Some of the automobiles which Nissan is producing in Smyrna, Tennessee. So I'm not quite sure whether I could give you exact numbers. It depends on the industry.
Mr. Marbury?
Do you feel that the USSR is in any way affect the economy and do not, I understand what you have already said, but if you do, who is going to defend Japan as opposed to U.S.
Well, I'm not the defense specialist, but what the Japan is thinking about its defense policy is based on the collectivism. Whether it's realistic or not, well, there is a matter of contention, but we want to rely on, of course, the mostly with the diplomatic measures, including United Nations, but you may argue that it's such a silly organization. But we still have to rely on this collective type of security.
In view of the Walter Mondale's support of the domestic content code and his support by an AFL-CIO that is advocating quite a few protectionist policies, does the Bank of Japan fear a Democratic victory in November?
Well, we central bankers are asked not to intervene in the politics.
Most of us in this room remember when the meaning of made in Japan was entirely different than today. We also remember a few years ago when restrictions were imposed, voluntary or involuntary, on the importation of Japanese cars. Congressmen and government assured us it wouldn't affect the prices, which is not true. If it's recognized that the quality of the Japanese car is so much greater than the American car, why are there restrictions in Japan that take a $10,000 American car, which probably isn't working in three, and take the price up to about 40? I can't imagine there would be that many Japanese anxious to go out and buy our lemons.
I must point out one thing, that there is a certain restriction, I think for the sake of tax purposes, that the Japanese exporters, car manufacturers cannot raise prices beyond more than a certain percentage of what they sell domestically.
Our dealers do because they can't get as many cars as they could sell.
So it's all up to dealers, which take advantage of it. But it's quite understandable because the numbers are limited. So why not? It's a market forces. So while I cannot blame those dealers who take the advantage of it, but I hear a certain concern from the Japanese car manufacturers that over a long run, this would affect the image of Japanese cars, because now at this moment, the car dealers are saying that, well, if you don't like this price, just leave it. So, I hear that Toyota and the Nissan people are saying that maybe this would give a very adverse image of Japanese cars over a long run, which they fostered and took so many years to build.
When you were referring to the economy, I presume, of Japan as second, were you referring to second in the free world?
Yes.
Or were you referring to second in the entire world? For example, I've always understood that the GMP ran as the United States first, the USSR second, and Japan third. Is that correct? Or am I misquoting that?
What I meant was that Japan is number 2 in free world. GNP wise, but maybe GNP is not maybe GNP is a too small a concept. If you take all other productive capacity and the size of other economic forces in total. I think this is a thing which we generally speak about.
See, the evaluation I read, that is, the yen were permitted to float.
Yes.
It would, without question, be second rather than third in the entire world, including the USSR. Is that correct?
Well, I'm not sure. I don't know this answer.
Evaluation of the GNP.
Yeah,
From
that's
the point of view of the yen is what I'm asking.
That's a little tricky. Yeah.
Mr. Sherman?
We see so many of your good people visiting the United States and taking pictures of what we do here. And we've been privileged to visit your good country. I just wonder if Dr. Bird would ask for a show of hands at how many of us have had the remarkable experience of being in your country. We could ask the audience so that we could
I think everybody
start to learn.
will respond. How many have been in Japan?
Well, it's quite an impressive number. Thank you very much. But I should say that we always welcome the rest who did not make
But why would you prefer to hold down a third world country than to build up the defense of your own? I don't understand.
Well, it's we think it no, it depends on person's philosophy, but we prefer this pacifist attitude, at this moment, and we think that the money should be used for more productive purposes.
Then you send your own country.
Well, we are doing our own. It's not by building up nuclear weapons.
If that is your philosophy and your policy, then maybe you could elaborate on it. You can tell us what you're doing in some of the third world countries, where you're doing it, what increases you might be planning, and how you think that might affect your economy. Well, mentioned before.
Well, if I want to be specific, I would point out that Japan is trying to be number 2 donator to the World Bank. That is, we want to increase our quota and shares in the World Bank. At this moment, we are number 5. And we are contributing to the IDA, International Development Associations, the largest share next to the United States. And also, we are maintaining the official flow of aid to that country. For instance, last year we budgeted about roughly 9.6%, I presume, of increase in official assistance to Third World, despite the fact that the other expenditures increased practically nil.
Do you have a target date? When do you think you might be number 2?
Well, I don't know. There is some problem in it.
Yes, sir.
Could you compare the wage rates between Japanese workmen and American workmen?
Of course, it differs industry by industry, but if I take on average, some people say that Japanese wage level is about 70 to 80% of the American workers, if we include the benefits, fringe benefits as well.
Yes, sir. time for one last question.
We've recently heard about Theory Z as a management technique involving workers and management. To what extent do you think that has had an impact on the increased productivity of Japanese industry?
I think it's the Theory Z is derivative of what's going on in Japan. That's what I understand. So it's not the Theory Z which increases productivity, but it's other way around. We drive the conclusion from what's going on in Japanese companies. So I think that if you take a very advanced, very efficient industry like automotive, then I'm sure that it's tremendous impact, which affects also other industries. But we, as I mentioned earlier, that we do have a lot of inefficient sectors as well.
We certainly thank you very much for your thorough answers to the questions, even those that were somewhat uncomfortable. This was a very enjoyable question and answer session. We thank you very much for coming from New York.